My name is Naz Barma, and I'm a professor and associate dean here. It's a great pleasure to see you all with us here today for this kickoff event on the eve of Colorado Sunfest 2025. We're thrilled to partner again with the Colorado Sun in hosting timely public conversations like this evening's post-legislative session recap. The Colorado Sun is notable for a commitment to fact-based, civic-minded reporting that has strengthened independent nonprofit journalism in our state. The Korbel School, too, is deeply committed to fostering a well-informed and vibrant society. Through rigorous research, education, and dialogue on the pressing challenges we face, from local issues to global concerns, we aim to cultivate understanding, promote solutions, and dialogue on pressing local to global issues. Events like the Colorado Sunfest extend these shared goals into public life by bringing together policy practitioners, journalists, and the broader community. The Scrivener Institute of Public Policy, which I direct, is dedicated to encouraging open, inclusive dialogue on democratic governance and policymaking processes. This post-legislative session recap exemplifies that goal by offering us a chance to reflect together on the decisions shaping Colorado's future. Thank you all so much for being here with us, which itself is a wonderful expression of civic engagement, especially on an evening when the Nuggets are in a playoff. It's an honor for me to welcome to the stage someone who has been leading this kind of crucial work his whole career, Larry Rickman, co-founder, former editor, and now publisher of the Colorado Sun. Larry, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and privilege for the Korbel School to partner with the Colorado Sun again.
Thanks so much. Hey, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'll make this quick because nobody came here to hear me, but I want to just thank you all on behalf of the Colorado Sun. Again, we're a reader-supported nonprofit. We're pleased to be able to convene conversations not only like tonight, but also tomorrow. We have a full day of panel discussions throughout the building. Hope you can join us for that. A couple of things. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Aponte and Busam, Public Affairs Consultants, and Colorado Capital Watch for sponsoring tonight's event. And of course, thanks to our friends at the Josef Korbel School of International Studies for being our host. The governor's on a tight schedule, so I'm going to make this quick and turn this over to Jesse Paul and the governor. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all.
All your questions very fast. I usually speak pretty fast, don't I?
Yeah, me too. It's a Philly guy in me. Well, there's a jug of milk here for you if you want it. Just kidding, it's water.
It's water, right? Yeah.
Well, Governor, thanks so much for doing this. We always appreciate hearing from you after the legislative session. So I want to start off by talking about your relationship with the governor this time around. We don't have to recount all of it.
Wait, my relationship with the legislature.
Legislature, yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
We'll talk.
Great relationship with I agree with him 100% of the time, Jesse.
Yeah, you look in the mirror. You're a yes man. You didn't get all of your agenda done this year. You did get some key parts. But with one more year, at least one more session as governor, and a lot left on your policy agenda, I wonder how you're going to repair that relationship to get what you want done in your final year.
Well, I think we have a great relationship. I mean, it's obviously, different folks, even from when I first started. And obviously Speaker McCluskie's here, but we worked with Speaker Becker and then Speaker Garnett, and now Speaker McCluskie we get to work with for 2 times. And then Senate President Steve Fenberg and now James Coleman and Dominic Moreno, Robert Rodriguez, so many different folks. Probably the hardest thing we did in that time is when we had all the federal aid money that we had to figure out what to do. It was really hard because there was not a state procedure for doing that. It was sort of it was outside the budget, but it wasn't inside the budget, and we had to really convene and figure that out, and we did that. Like, we got that done, which was amazing, effectively, great investments for our state. This session, our priorities, housing, and we were very successful, right? So you remember the session 2 years ago when we tried to put everything in one bill, didn't work. This year we had many bills, and basically all of them except for one made it on housing. I've signed a number of them. Modular housing reform, we signed the funds from Treasurer buying bonds to construct them up in the high country today. We did smart stair reform, which took us 2 years, didn't make it last time, got it this time, and a number of others. So we're continuing that work, and in response to, of course, one of the biggest concerns people have, cost of housing, and then public safety is the other big one. So really the things we were looking at in public safety did make it through, and along with the successful implementation of Proposition 130.
With 1 year left, though, I know you oftentimes say that some of these big ticket items take more than 1 year. But with 1 year left, I wonder how you're going to try and persuade the legislature to do things like, privatize Pinnacle Assurance. I know you didn't get what you want on tip wages. Labor Peace Act sounds like it's going to come back. We've talked about the veto. AI didn't get done. YIGB didn't get done. Property reinsurance. These were big ticket items that you wanted this session, and I wonder, what you chalk up the failure of those two, because what I'm hearing from legislators is they felt like they wanted to push back on you a little bit this year.
Well, I was surprised that they didn't take action on reducing homeowners insurance rates. That one surprised me, because going into session, there was a lot of interest in it, and I still think there was. In fact, I think it probably majorities in both chambers wanted to do it, but the way the process works, it just wasn't able to happen. Obviously, we look at all the costs for homeowners, so that's why we did property tax. Property tax is a cost. So is homeowners insurance. So is the need to build more homes. So we just look at holistically all of the costs that are associated with housing people have, and homeowners insurance is not. You have to have. If you have a mortgage, you have to have it, and so. It's not discretionary, and absolutely that we need to take action on that. And that, one thing I had to learn about as we were looking into this is actually, people think fires, that's certainly a driver. The bigger driver is actually hail damage. So it's about, of the increases we've seen, it's about 70% of that increase is hail. The other 30% is fire. So we do have strategies for both. Obviously, we're going to continue that work. For hail, it's actually simpler in that people need hail-resistant roofs. And so as we replace roofs, especially in the eastern end of the metro area, we need to do that with roofs that won't have to be replaced in 3 years or 5 years again because of hail damage. Fire is much more complicated and obviously challenging with the increased risk from climate change and demographics, but we have lost insurers from many wildlife-urban interface markets, and we do need a plan to bring them back.
I want to talk a little bit about AI. That was obviously one of the things on the list of things that didn't get done this session, and when that bill was pulled in the Senate committee, you sent this letter, with some of the top Colorado Democrats, Phil Weiser, Mike Johnston, Michael Bennett, Joe Neguse, Brittany Penderson. I wonder, if you felt like you needed kind of their firepower because you thought lawmakers weren't taking you seriously on the need on that bill. Why did you bring those folks in?
Frankly, it was actually, I wouldn't even say we brought them together. They were as eager to say stuff even without me. I joined them. I wasn't going to join them if we did something, but I joined them. So it wasn't really us. We didn't go to them and say, you need to do this. They actually... And whoever it started, we sort of came in and decided to sign last, frankly, of those folks because we were still working legislatively. I think everybody who just looks at Colorado says we want to be an innovative state. We want to be on the forefront of positive AI use in our lives. Many of us use it personally, but this was more in the broader sense. So there's some areas of that bill that we need to get fixed, and I thought we did agree with a letter with Robert Rodriguez saying here's the things we're going to do, and some of the big ones include making sure the developers have the responsibility, not what we call deployers. So just because you use AI, you don't know what's in it. You can't be expected to, but whoever codes the AI, that is should be the responsibility for, in this case, making sure they are not discriminatory. So we have several paths on that. There is the possibility, you probably saw this, that the federal government could do a moratorium of states doing this. That's fine. Frankly, if you saw my signing letter on that in the first place, I said the federal government needs to do this anyway because it's not any good for 50 states to have 50 different compliance systems for AI. It's a nightmare. It's more important to get it even uniform than entirely right. I would argue the EU doesn't have it exactly right. In many ways, they overregulate AI, but at least they're uniform. You can do the same thing in France and Italy and Spain. We are going down a route that's very dangerous if we don't figure that out.
So let's stick with AI a little bit more. You have said that you support this federal moratorium push by Republicans in Congress. I think that's an interesting thing that we could probably talk about because it doesn't really seem like you to support, a federal intervention on a state issue. But, this is Colorado has its AI law. It's going to take effect in February 2026, barring a special session or action being taken in the first days of the legislative session next year. But I think we can both see why that would be problematic. Companies are going to have to prepare and gamble for whether or not that's going to happen. Obviously, this has been kind of a fickle policy in terms of what goes on. So, are you willing to let this take effect, or are we going to have a special session?
Well, no, I think in practice, you're right. You touched on the two possibilities. Either it would have to be delayed a year during a special session, or addressed on the content issues. But that's harder in a special session. I think people want the general session to work on the content of it, but at least delayed. Or, as you said, an agreement to do that in January. I mean, people would have to be clear that that's what they wanted to do, and the industry and others would have to know that. So those are the possibilities that I see. The third one would be a federal moratorium. We wouldn't have to do anything.
Are those conversations starting now about fixing it early next session, or having a special session? Like what?
We haven't discussed that. I mean, I'll ask the speaker what she thinks, but I don't know. I mean, but those are the two I see. I mean, either an agreement to do it in January, or there's other reasons there might be a special session, and I think it's something that would certainly be part of a special session if we had to have one. Primarily, that would be fiscal matters, and you want to get to those. But that would be the impetus behind the need for a special session, if there is one. Would be a major change in the fiscal situation because of federal policy. The biggest thing we're watching is whether they slash Medicaid in a way that we have to change the policy here quickly, because that's not something that we can do administratively.
We will get to Medicaid in just 1 second, but I want to stick with one more tech question. I wonder where you're at with the potential veto of the rideshare safety bill. Obviously, this was something that was talked about a lot at the end of session. Your office expressed a lot of concerns about where the policy ended up. Colorado Public Radio, our partners, reported that Uber says it's going to leave the state if you sign it into law. Are you going to veto that bill?
Well, I don't have a scoop for you right here, right now, Jesse. We're evaluating all the bills. We were very consistent during the process on that one. Our Department of Transportation testified an opposed position. We also did provide, at several points during the process, language that would have made the bill acceptable to us. That was not included in the final bill. So we're evaluating that. I certainly wouldn't want to take any action that would lead to major rideshare programs that employ tens of thousands of people, and other people rely on for safe passage leaving the state. So obviously, that would be one of the factors we consider.
It kind of sounds like you made up your mind on this one, though. What do you need to evaluate in terms of to make a decision to sign it?
Well, there were a lot of amendments that were run at the last minute that we literally we didn't even see until, I think we're talking 8-9 days ago. So we're just looking at the final. We're going to look at the final product.
Okay. So I promised Medicaid talk, so let's talk Medicaid. Obviously, you have said and lawmakers have said that if the federal government, if Republicans in Congress cut Medicaid spending, we're going to have to probably come back for a special session. Have you started to think, though, about where the state would make up the difference? And would the state even backfill it, or would we just have to contend with those cuts?
Well, the short answer is no. We can't do that. We don't have the ability to backfill. I mean, we'll try to find prioritization of resources. So here's why. So the federal government fiscal year, they start their years October 1st. We start ours July 1st. So theirs ends September 30th. So if they take action in, for instance, July, or it goes into August, whenever they take action, they will likely, well, we don't expect that Medicaid cuts would be front-loaded. They'd probably even be worse in out years. Something's probably going to be cut in the middle of our fiscal year. And so that is why it's unlikely, if it's large, we would be able to wait and then do the budget for the next year. Lord knows that'll be harder too, but we'd likely have to do it this year. And yes, if you know the state budget, there's not the ability to backfill. It's going to be a very challenging discussion, and we don't know what the federal government's going to do. So there's not a plan for it yet. We don't know exactly what form it will take. But our levers here would either be, partially reducing the size of the Medicaid expansion, meaning people would lose coverage, and or reducing the benefits that people have. And I would add that this adds cost to everybody who buys commercial insurance. If people lose Medicaid, there's cost shifting on. They still get the care. They get cost shifting onto those who pay private insurance. So it would likely lead to increased insurance rates as well.
Are you guys looking at where those benefit cuts might happen? I mean, you're not planning yet?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have some that are easy, but they don't add up to enough. Easy in the sense that we actually proposed them and the JBC didn't take them. So we absolutely have 40, 50, 60 million, 80 million that we think do easily if they agreed. But unfortunately, that's not the level of magnitude we're talking about. We could be talking about $1 billion. So that cuts very close to the bone. It's going to be gut-wrenching to have to make those decisions. it likely would have to be some combination of, I hope not, we're not alone in this, by the way, every state is going to go through this, but all the states that have the Medicaid expansion, if that's one of the things that they reduce the funding match for, we will have to likely look at reducing the size of who we have expanded Medicaid to. Separately, we will have to look at the suite of services, and certainly some of the things we've added as benefits over my tenure as governor would likely have to be rolled back, and then very likely other things as well. So those will be the very tough decisions, why I've talked about this a lot. If the federal government cuts Medicaid, that will directly lead to increased costs for everybody on commercial insurance, hundreds of thousands of Colorados being thrown off of their plan, and people not having access to the benefits that they've had over the last few years. So all of those things are going to happen.
Well, this seems like a good time to talk about Tabor, right? Because obviously a lot of the state governments' funding constraints have to do with the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And as you know, there was a push from some Democrats in the legislature this year to kind of start picking away at the constitutional amendment. In the past, you've worked on Proposition CC, Proposition HH. Do you think that Democrats should try again to eliminate the cap, or have voters just said, stop doing that?
Well, first of all, I don't want to, the cuts to health care are not because of Tabor, they're because of the federal government and Congress and President Trump cutting Medicaid.
But the state's ability to backfill.
But we already only get 90 cents back on every dollar we send to Washington. And that's okay. Again, the states that get more than $1 back are poorer states. I understand that. But this will be even worse for Colorado if now we're getting 82 cents back on every dollar we send. So I want to make sure you understand it's just a very different issue. If they cut Medicaid, it doesn't matter. Even if you didn't have Tabor, you'd have the very similar conversation here. In fact,
you'd have a few extra $1 billion.
No, not billions. No, I mean, first of all, we hope if there's recession, there won't be any Tabor surplus at all. But I don't have the numbers in front of me. I believe the recent one is something like 400 million-ish. Yeah, 400 million surplus. So, and yet the Medicaid cuts are going to be in the billions. So Tabor. So the one thing that is referred to the ballot this November would be allowing the state to use the extra money collected for school lunches to be deployed. I support that. That was similar to when marijuana came in over the projections. When nicotine came over, we often have to go back and ask for more. So that's on the ballot. I support that. When I look at where we've been successful with ballot reforms on Tabor, Prop 123 passed. It was a discrete ask. It was a certain amount of money around a priority people deeply cared about. I think something around education that was targeted in a certain amount would also have a lot of appeal to people. But no, I think clearly the voters don't want to get rid of caps or do something that's larger than that. They've rejected that a number of times.
Okay. One more. What I just want to point out, too, that part of the reason the Tabor surplus isn't as high as it has been in previous years is that Democrats have done a lot of tax expenditures, so that has cut into some of the cap excess that we've had. Just to be fair.
Well, it all gets refunded some way, Jesse. So, I mean, there's, whether there's 6-tier, 1-tier, 3-tier income tax cuts, sales tax cuts, tax credits for low income. So those are all mechanisms that it legally gets returned to people with. We as one of our priorities wanted to cut taxes. There is an income tax piece that likely won't be triggered next year because it won't be high enough. It is triggered this year. So the income tax rate is 4.25% instead of 4.4%. But if there's not enough of a surplus, that's not triggered. So there's a variety of mechanisms to refund it. And we also wanted to make sure we had some trouble, potential trouble, that they also have to pass not only state legal compliance, but also IRS compliance. That was another level that we had to make sure that these tax refunds wouldn't in fact be taxed by the federal government.
Sure. So on Tabor, it sounds like you're opposed to a cap. You said in the past that you don't support eliminating voters' ability to weigh in on tax increases. So what do Democrats do on Tabor? Do they do nothing? Do they ask for tax increases?
If we want to win at the ballot, again, I think the path is clear. It's not necessarily one that is taken by the legislature. I think a discrete ask around something that people value, and I look at what people value: education, housing, healthcare, around those three. A discrete ask, meaning maybe you're asking for 50, maybe you're asking for 120. What was Prop 123? It was about 100 million a year, I believe. So a certain dollar amount, they can only use it for that. And it's one of the things people want. And I think that formula worked on housing. I think it's a reasonable formula. It would have a decent, no, when I say a decent chance, it doesn't mean it's definitely going to pass, but I mean, if I was designing something to win, I would say, why don't we do $100 million for teacher salaries? That might win, and would be good policy.
All right, we've got a few minutes left, and I've got a lot of questions. So let's talk about the Labor Peace Act, maybe. So obviously, unions have made it clear that they're pretty upset with you about your plans in the Labor Peace Act. They had that big rally at the Capitol last year after you vetoed a few of their priority bills. I met your fake cousin Jerry Polis at a rally. Who was this was someone dressed up as you trying to.
Really?
Yes,
I did not see that.
I'll send you a picture. It was pretty entertaining, actually. So look, there are folks who Democrats in the legislature said that they were sending you the Labor Peace Act repeal, the Senate Bill 5, in part because they wanted you to make a tough decision on this because they think that you want to run for president. They want to force you essentially to stand with unions or sacrifice your political career. I just want you to respond to that because I think it's an interesting political dynamic.
Well, I had not heard that. I mean, I don't think there's any, sometimes in the press, when you guys say he threatened to veto this or that, we don't ever threaten. We just try to be transparent with everybody where we are. Labor has known where I was on that bill since before they introduced it, 100%. And I believe they would confirm that. If they didn't, I would say they were not telling the truth. But I absolutely think they would confirm that. Every time they asked, we told them where we were. So there's no drama. On any bill, a legislator can come to us and ask where we are. And there are times we say we don't know. Like, I'm making decisions on some of these bills. Like, there's this PBM bill, which we have not made our decision on yet because it's really complicated. And there's people on both sides saying it saves money on healthcare. So we're really looking at that. But we never told any legislator that we were okay with it. We never told any legislator we were going to veto it. But if a legislator asks, if we have a problem with the bill, we will say we do, or we'll say we don't know where we're at. We're going to need to evaluate that. So everybody knew where we were at on this. And we're in a place that I'll talk about here briefly. I support making it easier to we have first of all, the process of unionization is overseen by the federal board, so that doesn't change. But the process of dues deduction, we need to modernize in our state. Yes, we've had a Labor Peace Act for 83 years. We need to make it easier to have a second election. I think there's agreement on that, even broad agreement that we should have a way of, if there's enough support, why put the business and the workers through a second election? Why have two if there's enough support? And we can show that in the first election. So we should do that. But I've also told the folks in unions, I support that Colorado is a Labor Peace Act state, meaning we are not a right-to-work state. We are not a closed shop state. We are a hybrid state. And my commitment is to maintain that hybrid status. And so all of the negotiations occurred within that. Labor, while they would like to no longer be a labor peace state, they understood where we were. And they said, great, not great, but they said, we're willing to talk about having a bypass and reducing the percentage and not eliminating that altogether. That was a big concession because they obviously would want to get rid of that altogether. Business would rather not be having this conversation at all, but they also came a long way in the percentages. They basically said, we are okay with the concept of a bypass. We didn't quite get there, and then what the percentage would be on the second election. So we think if there's a replacement, again, we've been very clear, it needs to be one that is stable. The stability is inherently good. And I'm maybe not aiming for 83 years, but I hope if we could figure something out, it lasts 10 or 20 years.
Well, let me boil down the fundamental question there, though. It's Democrats in the legislature feel it's going to be politically damaging for you if and when you veto this bill. Do you think that this is going to hurt your future?
No, it would be politically suicide if I were to sign the bill, because obviously I said we were going to veto it. Labor knew when they introduced it where we were. So, I mean, my governorship would be over if I were to sign it, and I'm sure they understand that.
All right, last question. I know I've asked you a lot of times if you're going to run for president, and you don't really answer that. So I'm not going to ask that again. But I will ask you, would you rather be president or a cabinet secretary?
Well, as cabinet secretary for President Trump right now, I would not rather be that, no.
Or how about for a future president, a Democratic president?
I love Colorado here, and our kids are 10 and 13. I mean, I really don't have any plans to leave our state.
All right. Well, thank you, Governor. I appreciate your time this evening, and thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us. Yeah. All right. I see James Coleman, so that's great. So we're going to move on to the next part of our program here, which is the two Democratic leaders in the Capitol, House Speaker Julie McCluskie and Senate President James Coleman. And Megan Verlee, the public affairs editor at Colorado Public Radio, is going to join me. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate it. I know everyone's been on a very busy tour of the state signing bills and stuff like that, so thank you for making some time for us. Yeah, we appreciate it. Yeah. All right, I guess I'll do a little intro, even though probably everybody in this room probably knows who you guys are. House Speaker Julie McCluskie, a D-Dillon Democrat, just finished up her 3rd year leading the Colorado House of Representatives. Senate President James Coleman, a Denver Democrat who just finished up his 1st year leading the Colorado Senate. And as I said, Megan Verlee is here joining us, Public Affairs Editor at Colorado Public Radio. CPR and the Colorado Sun, as well as KUNC and Rocky Mountain PBS, are part of the Colorado Capital News Alliance, which some folks may have noticed this year. I've been on Purplish saying spicy meatball a bunch of times recently, and other assorted weird things. And we're just really glad to have that partnership, and Megan gracefully agreed to help me out. So welcome to you all. Thank you for fitting us into your busy schedules. Let's start where we started with the governor, which is the legislature's relationship this year with the first floor. It seemed like you guys were more willing than in years past to maybe buck him on a few things. And I wonder, if you think that has to do with him being a lame duck, if you think it's just frustration boiling over, reaching a boiling point. I'll let you guys fight over who wants to answer that question first.
Ladies first.
Well, first of all, hello. It is great to be here. I see so many familiar faces, and lovely to have a conversation about something that is still in the rearview mirror. We're just catching our breath after a very busy legislative session. I want to, it's such an interesting question, Jesse, because had you asked that question after 2019, I'm not sure I would answer it all that differently. I am a fan of the institution and talk a lot about preserving our authority and power and rights as a legislature, and of course, recognizing and honoring those of the powers, the rights of the executive branch. And we have had conflict. This isn't the first year where we've had conflict. I think maybe the difference is how visible it might be. The year that Senate Bill 213, the big land use bill, the year that bill did not succeed, there was a great deal of tension within the body, whether that was the right policy, if we were moving in the right direction, and of course the relationship with the governor. What I appreciate, I just finished my 7th year, I have 1 year remaining, is that my relationship with the governor has evolved over those years. I better understand his perspectives. I think members of the House certainly have grown to understand his perspective, which is a very clear point of view on certain topics. And so, we finding in our maturity, maybe, finding our voice and better articulating what we want and refining policy that has been in the hopper or in the pipeline for a while. So I have said this before to reporters, I don't think either of you, but I wish there were news stories about our great collaboration. The stories where we're all getting along and doing good work, bipartisan or otherwise, but we bring forward policy and there's a celebration, because there are so many more stories like that where we are working well together. And in the world of politics, we don't hear a lot of happy stories.
Well, before you jump in, maybe you can, I'll give you a tough question since you punted on that one at the start. Why do you think it's been more public this year than years past? Is it just that you guys don't care? Or why show the governor kind of, stick your thumb in his eye publicly?
Well, first of all, good evening, everybody. How y'all doing? Nah, we ain't gonna, how y'all doing? There we go. Okay, good. So really quickly, I want to say thank you to DU for also hosting this. Thank you, Jesse. If you work with DU, stand up real quick. Raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, good. Can we give it up for DU real quick? So I was an adjunct professor for like all of 10 classes in the fall, and I love our teachers so much. I don't know how y'all do it. So if you're an educator, thank you very much. But it was an honor, so it's just apropos that we're here finishing up session, and I just thank you for the opportunity to be here. So look, I would just say this to answer your question and compliment with the speaker, who I learned how to be in leadership from, because she's not new to this. It's a beautiful thing that we have checks and balances at the state level the same way we do at the federal level. And because of that, when it comes to having tough conversations with the governor, if we disagree, we also have the ability to veto override. But the important thing about that, just to your question, is that we only have 23 Democrats in the Senate, 12 Republicans, and it takes a 2/3 majority vote in order to do a veto override, which means any veto override is a bipartisan effort. So we had a lot of conversations this year before having those meetings with the governor about bills that he might consider vetoing. And I think to the speaker's point, we do a really good job of getting bills passed in alignment with the governor. So I don't think it was, at least in my first year, my experience was we got more done than we didn't. And if you think about all the bill signings and the tour that he's going on, we've gotten a lot of great bills passed. So I just look forward to continuing to have those conversations and building that relationship with the governor, especially over the interim on policies for next year.
Let's talk about that veto override, though, because you do have the ability not to get a bill on the governor's desk in time for the legislature to try to override him. So speaking about public tension, that was a big moment of it. Why not hold off on signing it or hold off on bringing it to the floor to not have that moment? Why did you put the legislature in that position this year?
Yeah, look, I would just say really quickly, and I believe the speaker and I share this same philosophy. We understand we want to work in partnership with the governor, but our responsibility is to our chambers. Our responsibility is to our caucus. And so we want to support our members in getting their bills passed. As you all know, we each get 5 bills that must be heard, must have a committee hearing, and have a fair legislative process to get through. The class that I taught was legislative process. So I dare not try to jeopardize that process. If my members do the work, they get their bill in committee, and they debate that, and it has the votes to pass, great. If it doesn't, it's going to die in committee or die on the floor. And so I'm really grateful that we have both strong House and Senate chambers that work together on policy so that when we get that to that place, our concern is less about, making it so that the governor isn't in a position to either sign it or let it go or to veto it. Our concern on the second floor is to make sure that we do the work with the people of Colorado to get the best possible bill to the governor's desk to give them the best chance to be able to sign the bill.
But not to like lean on this too much, but I can only remember one other veto override vote in my time in the legislature, and I think that was a Dave Williams bill that kind of like accidentally made it to the governor's desk, right? And then it came back, and the veto override failed. So, like, does that mean that you guys are starting to exercise this second floor power responsibility for the first time, or is it just that it hasn't happened in the past, or like why now?
Certainly the president offered the most obvious reason. It requires a 2/3 vote. And neither Democrats in the House nor the Senate own a 2/3 majority, so that it takes a bipartisan effort. The bill that was contemplated for a veto override was around social media use, and it was well supported by both chambers. I think at the point the veto was made clear, there were discussions in the Senate. That's where the bill had originated, so it went to that chamber first, and then it made it to the House. And what I think my bill sponsor recognized is that members may have supported the policy, may have been fans of the policy, but the veto override vote was a different vote for them. And I think because of the governor's analysis as well, and some of his concerns about the policy, it became more obvious to many of our members that there was more work to do here. It was a very difficult moment, I think, for both the House and the Senate, certainly the bill sponsors. Our bill sponsor made the decision not to bring it forward for a veto override vote, I think because he recognized the votes were not present in the chamber. What I do believe is that the policy will come back, and we will have the opportunity to continue to work on that, and I hope earn a signature from the governor.
So we talked a little bit with the governor about Tabor, and this is actually a question from one of our readers. Obviously, there was the resolution that was brought this year that would have directed the legislature's attorneys to file a lawsuit to invalidate Tabor. And the question from the reader was, why did leadership prevent the legislature from challenging the constitutionality of Tabor? So effectively, why did that resolution not come up for a vote in the House?
I'd start with maybe a broader picture initially, and that is Tabor was passed in 1992. There has been a previous lawsuit. There have been, I think, conversations in the greater, broader Colorado public about how Tabor has both served taxpayers by allowing them to vote on tax increases and also challenged us with a spending cap, a spending limit that may not be flexible enough given some of the challenges we are now facing as a state. The resolution that came forward, I think, was a really powerful conversation starter. The member that brought it forward deeply believes that the best path to improving our world with Tabor or changing our fiscal structure is through that lawsuit and overturning Tabor. I think what came forward through the conversations that began with that resolution are conversations about other approaches and other ways that we could address some of the difficulties we're facing with Tabor. This last fall, September, we received a forecast that surprised us and led to a $1.2 billion shortfall on our budget. And the surprise came that we saw a $600 million increase in Medicaid for long-term care services for our seniors who are in nursing facilities or on Medicaid receiving health care. That increase is going to continue. We are an older, grayer Colorado. I'm getting up there, and the gray hairs are arriving daily as of late.
But you look beautiful.
Thank you. I was counting on that, James. Thank you.
You
But
look
the
good
idea
too,
that
President
the
Coleman.
cap, the Tabor cap, is built on population growth and inflation is very inflexible when our population growth isn't just number of bodies, but changing demographics, changing needs. Our inability to be flexible and recognize that is very problematic. Just as inflation can grow one year in one sector, we've seen such an explosion in healthcare, for example, that doesn't exactly mirror what is driving cost pressures for a lot of our services and programs in the state. So I think the resolution, it was a powerful conversation starter. I don't think it's the end of what folks are going to hear about Tabor, either Tabor reform or Tabor, how can we redefine our fiscal structure in a way that better meets the needs of our public?
Well, if you're ruling out a lawsuit, that kind of leaves you going to voters who have not been very receptive to Democratic efforts to change fiscal rules in recent years. Where do you think they are in this? Do you think you have any chance of persuading the Colorado electorate to touch this amendment?
I would just ask this real quick question. Raise your hand. It's fine if you don't, but raise your hand if you have an in-depth knowledge of what Tabor is. Raise your hand. Great. Half the people in the room don't. Half the people in the room do. And for those who don't, what we have to do is a better job of an awareness campaign about our current financial situation at the state of Colorado. We need the help of the voters to figure out how we not only do better with the money we have, which again, to the speaker's credit, is an education champion, she has fought to make sure that we've had education funding in our state. We come in with this $1 billion deficit, but we leave the state legislative session with an additional $256 million for public education in the state of Colorado. So the part of the battle is making sure we do better with the money that we have, but the other part is communicating to the public in Colorado that we do need additional resources, and especially more so now than ever before with some of the federal cuts that we are seeing or could be seeing more of here in the state of Colorado. So I think we have to do a better job of truly communicating. Everybody in here, myself included, is dealing with an affordability crisis. It's harder to live in Colorado than it ever has been. I grew up in this state. I'm born and raised in my district. I can't afford to live in the neighborhood in Park Hill in Denver where I grew up. I live in Green Valley Ranch, which is annexed on way out far. I'm in rural Denver. But I still live in the city. But the thing is if I sold my house today, I'd have to vacate my seat because I couldn't afford to buy a home in my district. That's how it is. So what I think we agree, we align that there is a true affordability crisis. So when we start talking to people about, hey, we need more money, they're like, we need that money too. So we have to communicate, do a better awareness campaign, and figure out a way to make sure that the working class, people who are lower income, are able to retain and have more affordability and figure out ways for us to also get more dollars at the state to help people who need it the most.
Something you said, Madam Speaker, kind of piqued my interest because I know there's been conversations in years past about changing the way the cap is calculated. And I don't know if you were getting at that, but it sounds like you were talking about potentially saying, hey, maybe we weight the cap toward, instead of population growth, do we weight it toward age? Do we, is that kind of what you're floating or thinking of?
This is dangerous.
You call it the Jesse Paul Memorial Bill.
Yeah. I will not forecast or preview what may be coming because I don't know. What I would offer is that 1992 is a really long time ago. And in the world of most policy, it is time for us to talk again with our public about what should come next. And I really, thank you, rural Denver, you realize rural Denver is now, we're gonna have to coin that, the bridge the urban-rural divide. But you're so right that having conversations with our public is where this needs to start, because the value of a tax dollar, whether it's federal, state, or local, right, that matters. And I do think when Ref C came through, right, that was Governor Owens, it was a bipartisan effort. It was both at the Capitol, and I see heads nodding, outside of the Capitol, where, you know, a very broad coalition came together and said this cap is not, you know, we are headed for a significant budget disaster if we do not adjust the cap. I think it may be a time for us to revisit that and do it in a way that makes sense for who we are and who's in this state.
Do you think you would have any Republicans on that effort? It's good, harkening back to Ref C.
I usually go to the good Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer when I have any questions about funding. Oh, there she is in the back. As I understand, she and Rep. Sirota are going to come up and answer all of our tough finance questions. No, but I would say that I think when we talk about education funding, we talk about rural parts of the state, whether you're a D or a R, education funding also is a big issue in rural parts of the state where they don't have as much funding locally. So as much as we care about that here, I think in the rural parts of the state, regardless of your political affiliation, those folks care also about how we're going to afford to provide funding for education or for other economic needs. So I do think that you're going to get some bipartisan support because all of us are being impacted no matter where you are in the state when it comes to affordability.
So the governor said something interesting. He said, you know, basically voters have said no to eliminating the cap altogether. He doesn't want to go that route. Obviously, he doesn't want to change the part of Tabor that allows voters to weigh in on tax increases. You and I had talked during the session about this proposal that came through, and it sounds like the governor was supportive of that, to raise the cap, to raise money for specific purposes. I think it was like schools and rural hospitals. Is that going to be the legislature's job to put that on the ballot, or is this something that you guys are going to leave to folks outside the building like Scott Wasserman?
Yes, come on up, Scott.
You know, I'll offer, Jesse, we saw Proposition HH was a multifaceted ballot measure, right? It had so much in it that I think we lost our public with good intention, but maybe too complicated for a ballot measure. And the piece of HH that included a change to our cap, I think got lost in the story. So what I would offer is that regardless of whether the governor supports it, the legislature, it's ultimately a public decision. And one of the comments I heard from members when the Tabor resolution was moving through the system is Tabor was enshrined by the public through a vote. Those are the people who should have a vote on any changes that come next. So I really honor that and believe that we do need for it to be more than just a legislative solution. It needs to be a broad, well-received, and I hope, Megan, bipartisan. I think Governor Owens did a masterful job at that time in the work that happened. I would hope that Democratic leaders could do the same now and invite bipartisan support for a similar effort.
If we can shift gears a bit, I want to ask a question that I don't feel like was a question that got asked at the end of every session until the most recent couple of years, which is the chances of a special session, which seems to be almost an annual event. The governor said he does not want to see one on AI by itself, but I wonder if you two are worried enough about where things landed with that impending law to think that something needs to happen before January.
Yeah. Well, I would just say this really quickly. I love to be at the Capitol. Special sessions excite me. I'm just joking.
I think your colleagues are going to appreciate
Y'all were
hearing that.
Really? No, but what I would say is I think in conversations regarding special session, most of that conversation that I've had and we've talked with the governor is in case we need to from whatever happens at the federal administration. I don't think it would be isolated to whatever policies we had this year per se, so I don't know that. But what I would say is where the bill landed ultimately says that the policy we passed the prior year would go into effect in February of next year, and folks are concerned about that. And I think that there is a real opportunity over this interim to continue to have that conversation for us to be able to go into the legislative session next year and say, what can we do to improve upon the policy more so than we already have? And I, commend Majority Leader Rodriguez for all the work that he's done on trying to address concerns in that bill. And I also appreciate the conversations that we've had with Governor, with the business community around how we address concerns in the bill. But I don't foresee necessarily us having a special session strictly because of this one particular issue. I think it's a larger issue of making sure that we protect ourselves against the federal administration.
Thank you. In the legislative branch budget, we have historically put aside 20 days worth of funding for special sessions. Obviously, in the pandemic years, those were dollars that we ended up needing and used. We eliminated that part of our budget this year because of our $1.2 billion shortfall, and of course, Murphy's Law means that we for sure will need those dollars for a special session. And I was supportive of a delay with the implementation of the AI policy because of what I was hearing from educators around the state. The policy itself, I commend the bill sponsors, Majority Leader Rodriguez and others who are very passionate about making sure we get something in place, that we not lag behind but lead on this front. However, more time to me is not a bad thing, and certainly I would hope that we're going to be able to arrive at the right policy place, whether that comes through a special session or January of 26.
Where do you find the money for the special session? I mean, that was one of our questions on here, right? And it was actually interesting to see. We found out $30,000 a day is what it costs. Yeah. I know we've kind of debated that, at least in our newsroom, over the years. So, like, where do you find the money in the couch cushions for that? Because I think solving Medicaid and AI is not necessarily a 3-day endeavor.
I'm going to punt that question to the amazing 2 Joint Budget Committee members who are going to be speaking after us. But I will lift up, Jesse, this year's budget was challenging. Next year's will be more challenging. And I think we tightened our belts. We found places where we could trim and cut appropriately and still preserve our core functions, our core services, and with our structural deficit, with costs rising at a rate where revenues cannot meet for a balanced budget, cannot meet the demand, I think we're going to have to be more creative, and certainly finding dollars for a special session, we have to be thoughtful about every penny that we spend.
My understanding was you're going to start a GoFundMe for that. You told me.
I thought you were going to pay for it personally. You're going to sell your truck?
I'll sell that.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes.
Well, speaking of things that were lost with the trimming, interim committees were one of the things on the chopping block. Do you see finances improving enough to bring those back in the next few years? And if not, what's being lost legislatively not having that focused work going on the rest of the year?
I really appreciate that question, Megan, because I don't know that most people know what an interim committee is, so thank you. Our members are allowed to pick a particular policy, idea, or topic and draft a letter for an interim committee, a committee that would meet between the end of session and the start of the next one. Those interim committees have been, I think, very valuable in bringing forward policy on things like this last year, Indian affairs, our relationship with our 2 recognized tribes in this state. There was an interim committee that met and brought forward some very important policy for both our tribes and the state relationship. And we've had numerous other interim committees. But as a part of our budget challenges, we did eliminate both letter interim committees and some that had been established in statute for beyond just one interim. And I think that members, being resourceful, will find ways to still have those policy discussions. It will be challenging, though, not to have a more public discussion at the Capitol with staff in that more formal public way. But I hope that we can bring back the opportunity to host those, even if in a limited way in the future. At least for now, it was the right budget decision.
And I would just say, to the speaker's point, it's great that we have a legislative process where we do have a public hearing and we're able to discuss policies and what we want to work on in the following year. But, you know, when I was growing up, and we still do this now, we have these things called town halls. Now, you got to make sure your elected officials show up to those. We also have to make sure we have those, but we should have those conversations. I remember during COVID, we weren't all getting together, but a lot of these conversations we were having were virtual. People could participate and they could ask questions, they could engage, and it was in some form of a public setting. So even though we don't have that at the state right now because of budget cuts and eliminated many of the interim committees that we typically would have, we are able to still have those conversations with community like we're having right now and allow it to be televised and allow people to plug in and engage.
One of the questions that we were thinking of coming into tonight was about Senate Bill 3. When that goes into effect, if it does, if the courts let it, Colorado will become one of the most difficult places in the country to buy a semi-automatic rifle and a whole list of other firearms. But again, that's if the new law isn't struck down. And I know you guys oftentimes will say to things like this, you know, well, we feel it's constitutional. But with this one in particular, I wonder, you know, just a gut check, or do you guys think this is going to hold up in court with Bruin?
Look, I would say we'll leave that up to the courts to determine whether or not it's going to be held up. Our responsibility is to work with our members and the community to figure out how to make sure we have greater public safety here in the state of Colorado. And so for me, I truly believe that it's something that we'll continue to work on and have these conversations. I just want to make sure that we continue to plug in with community on how we do better on implementing our policies so that we ultimately have better public safety in the state.
Do you have a sense of like where gun policy goes from here? And not to cut you off, but one of the things, you know, we talked about on Purplish in the final episode was this idea that we kind of came into this session thinking like, oh my God, Democrats at the legislature have done a ton on gun regulations. We're not anticipating anything. And then this year seemed to be one of the most extensive. So I don't know if your caucus is already having those conversations, but are there plans to push further and take more action?
Yeah, Jesse, that's such a good question. And I noticed in the Colorado Sun's kind of closing article on the highlights that was one of the, I don't know, 4 or 5 points that you had made, that gun violence prevention legislation was a bit of a surprise this year. There was more of it. And our president made an excellent point. We show up elected to do a job by those that have hired us through the ballot box. And in my district, I represent 6 counties in the high country. 3 of my counties tend to be blue in their voting patterns, and 3 are red. And when I get out in those different counties, I hear very different stories. But I will say that public safety, gun violence prevention has been an important part of some of those conversations. I think down here in urban settings, gun violence prevention, and particularly with some of our school youth, has been a much higher, louder, more acute conversation. So what we bring forward really is in response to what we are hearing at the doors, in our town halls, in conversations with constituents. I had 1,777 constituents reach out to me this session to give me feedback or to ask for help or offer an opinion on a bill. That's really powerful. I'd love to, take that number times 10 and hear from that many more people during a legislative session. But it's those people that are giving me the direction on policy. And I don't know what comes next. I do think Senate Bill 3 was a significant step for us. We had brought bills forward that had been both controversial and I don't think fully supported by Democrats in the building these last couple of years. Senate Bill 3 was the ultimate compromise in helping to drive a permit and training process that allows, I'll say, responsible gun owners to own these AR or AK guns, but in a way that we hope promotes more safety. And with the process that is now required, I hope that process screens out those that would use these weapons for harm. But I think you could find that on any of the fronts, any of the policy areas that we are working. Housing, right? You see so many housing or healthcare bills. It's because those are expensive things, and our voters, our constituents are demanding that we do more work in those areas, and so we are. I've said to the Hospital Association, I don't know if we have anybody here from hospitals, but my very first year, I worked on the reinsurance bill in healthcare that last year saved insurance, folks who have insurance on the individual marketplace, $500 million, right? That was a lot of money, and it's a program that's been working. But I remember saying to the hospitals then, and I said it to them again this year, you know, you're the experts in the healthcare system. You know how things work. What can we do better to help bring down costs for the people in this state who are tired of paying so much for healthcare? And I think, you know, that continues to drive more and more policy in this arena to try and meet the demands of those that have hired us.
Just real quick, I want to say I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Senator Tom Sullivan. I don't know how many of you, but raise your hand if you've been affected by gun violence at all. I know I have been. Okay. And so for those of you that didn't put your hand up, God bless you, and I pray you never do. I knew his son, Alex Sullivan, and he was murdered in the theater shooting. And so he comes to the building because he felt like there wasn't anyone in the building that represented who he wished he had as an elected official when he was on the outside. So he gets elected, and he comes in and he says, I'm going to work on these policies. Now, what the speaker just got finished saying is, if you have a firearm and you want to have a detachable magazine, then you should take a firearm safety course. Why is that an issue? Specific to that thing, high capacity detachable magazine. Why is ammunition just sitting out available for purchase? There's been shootings in our country where an individual could access a firearm and might not have had any ammunition in it, but they can go and purchase ammunition and now have access to a firearm with ammunition. So we made it so that it's stored away and it's not easily accessible. You actually have to purchase it, and you have to have a process by which you get ammunition. This is a policy that, God forbid, I never have to experience as a father with my two children that motivated me to do something about it. And I will say, this was a grueling process. A lot of people don't understand that we have members across our chambers, as well as our parties, our caucuses, that have different values within their districts. So we had many, many, many conversations behind the scenes with Senator Tom Sullivan and the other sponsors. But imagine trying to navigate that with an individual whose son is not here anymore, but yours is. And saying, hey, I know what you want to do, but we got to find a way where this is going to be implemented and it's going to actually save lives. And he came into it with that mentality, and so did the other sponsors, but we were able to address and adjust to make sure that everybody's needs were being met and increase public safety in our state. So it's a tough conversation to have, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about every Friday, Senator Sullivan stands up and he says, this is the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 100th, however many Friday since I lost my son. And he's here for a mission, and he's done his job, and he's also voted on all the other bills, affordability and housing and healthcare. But this is why he's here, and I'm proud of the work that we did with the House, with the first floor, to figure out a way to increase public safety. But I think I'd be remiss if I didn't at least acknowledge he has been a champion for that work.
Well, Mr. President, I'm going to ask about the other president now, the one in the White House. The legislature passed a bunch of bills this session that were fairly directly confrontational with the Trump administration on immigration, trans rights, abortion, vaccines, a lot of things. Did either of you at any point talk to your caucuses and warn them about potential blowback from this? Do you have any concerns for how the administration might react to some of the legislation that's been passed this year?
It's a great question, Megan, and I'll start with the day after the election last year. My caucus came together and immediately started talking about how do we protect the people that we serve. I think one of our themes out of the gate, one of the focus points for our caucus has been protecting the rights, the civil rights and freedoms of the people in this state. And it was a broad array of bills that really tackled that, whether it was the Colorado Voting Rights Act the disability clarifications and definitions that we put into the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, the steps that we took for the LGBTQ community, transgender community, immigration. We had started much of that work years before. It wasn't just now with President Trump. And I think, you know, when I reflect on Coloradans and what I hear from the public, you know, there has been a really strong independent nature in this state, a spirit, and protecting an individual's right to make their own determination, live their life, and have their civil rights protected is something that I think I want to say is universal here. And the way that Coloradans have approached our work has been very supportive. We did create the Colorado Defense Fund, a $4 million fund that can be used to make sure that federal tax dollars come back to this state. They were paid in by Republicans, unaffiliateds, and Democrats here in Colorado. They've gone to the federal government, and we want to make sure those dollars come back to us, whether it's in Medicaid or other safety net programs or the myriad, the dozens of grants that we currently have underway. And so those dollars will be utilized if funds are frozen or taken from us illegally, a way for us to build both our capacity and legal protection. And, you know, the idea that we shouldn't be fighting for a person's civil rights is really painful on a lot of fronts. And I don't know that folks in the chamber were thinking about legislation in terms of what will this mean in federal dollars or revenge or what that means. I think we were thinking about the people that we serve. And I think the policy, certainly, I think it was narrow, it was focused. Both the immigration and LGBTQ transgender policy went through a great deal of work to make sure that we were clear and defined in what it was we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I would just say, to add on to the speaker, it's always the right time to do the right thing. Sounds good, right? It's always the right time to do the right thing. This state was founded, before it was a state, as a territory, on not becoming a slave state by the only stained glass in the House chambers. If you have nothing else to do, go visit. Barney Ford, escaped slave from Mississippi, came here to Colorado, became a prominent businessman, and told Washington, D.C., before Colorado becomes a state, we have to have a commitment that it's not a slave state. And in 2025, we're having a conversation about rolling back protections of people's civil rights. This is what the state was founded on. When we talk about progressive, it's not about some far left blue ideology. It's about we do the right thing because it's always the right time to do the right thing. Now, to the speaker's point, we don't do things reckless. We do it calculated, strategic. And we have conversations about how the policy can be passed, how it can be implemented, and yes, how we can afford it. But when we think about what policies we pass, we're not thinking about, we're concerned what's going to happen from the federal administration. And it's crazy that we're living in a time where we're concerned about doing what we need to as a state and whether or not we're going to do it based off of cuts because somebody who's not in our state wants to take away funding and rights. And so shout out to the legislature and the governor for the $4 million Colorado Defense Fund. And shout out to our AG, who, if I'm not mistaken, has filed over 20 lawsuits to protect our state. So I'm just glad to be in the state of Colorado and not some other state where we don't have the right representation and leadership.
And I would, thank you. We all needed that, right? We needed that moment. You know, when the Dobbs decision was coming down, 3 years ago, Colorado reacted and we took steps to put into statute a woman's right to choose, the Reproductive Health Equity Act. And then this past fall, we took that to the voters, and the voters affirmed that commitment and put a woman's right to choose in the Colorado Constitution. Another measure also came forward this year. At the ballot box, Coloradans confirmed a right to equal marriage. And those voices carry over into other policy. I think both of those measures this last fall are a strong indication of that independent, civil rights focused spirit of the folks that live here and what their priorities are.
Well, we'll have to leave it there because we're at time. But thank you so much. We really appreciate your time this evening, and thanks for letting us grill you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
All right, well, we'll welcome up our next panelists, Representative Emily Sirota and Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer. Well, thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. As you have probably gathered, it was a tough budget year at the legislature, and so that's why we've invited our two final guests, members of the 6-member Joint Budget Committee. We have Representative Emily Sirota from a Denver Democrat and Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer, a Brighton Republican. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. Oh, here you go. So here's a very broad question, but I think an important one that'll it kind of set the stage for this question. But can you talk about what the single hardest vote was that you took on the JBC this year as you tried to balance the budget and trim about $1.2 billion out of your spending plans from the previous year? I don't know which one of you want to take that very fun question.
Sure, I can start. There were a couple of pretty hard votes, and for me, they're in the child welfare areas and probably even in the Medicaid provider rates. So not increasing the provider rates more than 1.6% when the governor started at 0. So I think we at least did an increase. That was good, but it was still well below what inflation was. And I think that's hard, knowing the critical mode that our healthcare system is in right now and how important it is that we have healthcare in this state for everybody, whether you're on Medicaid or not. It's important that we have a strong healthcare system throughout the state. So when we're talking about 25 counties that have a maternal healthcare desert, and we can't get provider rates up to 2%, 2.4%, keep up with inflation at least, that was a tough vote, I think, from my perspective.
Okay. I would agree. We took a lot of tough votes during our months of budget balancing, and I think a lot of the difficult votes were around Medicaid. I think we did a really remarkable job in protecting that program as best we could. One of our analysts presented us with a choice to literally take away ponies from children. And it was equine therapy for children with disabilities. And we, the committee, took a vote to delay a community health worker provision that would fund workers in the community in getting people care and preventive services, which actually ultimately our colleagues in the General Assembly had a different choice around, and so we actually just delayed that instead of stopped the program before it began. But I think those were some really tough choices that we had to make, and I anticipate we'll have more of them in the coming year. So we were spared momentarily.
Well, I fear this is going to be the tough choices interview right here. 'Cause the next question comes from a reader. The 2025-26 budget drained cash funds that support mostly rural, disadvantaged local governments and allowed the state to spend more in other areas and cut less in others. Is this a sustainable strategy, going to the cash funds?
Well, I can start first on this one. I don't believe that's accurate. I don't believe that we drained cash funds just to go after small rural areas of the state. The cash funds that we drained, were inactive funds. They've been inactive for the last 2 years. Those are the ones that we took all the funding from. Other ones, we swept some of the cash funds where they had huge fund balances. So for example, there might have been a fund that had a $6 million fund balance, or maybe more likely like a $2 million fund balance, and we may have taken 500,000 of that, or half of it, but we didn't drain the whole fund. We did take interest off of the cash funds and move those over. So I think we were very cautious in where the funds were going and how we were impacting Coloradoans, people who live in the state. And I would say with this joint budget committee, certainly for the last 3 years, because Representative Sirota and I have been on the joint budget committee for 3 years and together, and 4 of us have been on together for 3 years, and even including Senator Amabile and Representative Taggart, kind of the newer members, we were very clear on what we believe the priority should be in the budget. We're very clear on who writes the budget, and it's the joint budget committee. And we are very clear our priorities were education, post-secondary education, Medicaid, provider rates, and then my next one was child welfare, which pretty much seemed to be kind of everyone else's next one as well. So I think we stuck to our priorities. I don't think we had a crisis of priorities on the Joint Budget Committee.
I would agree. I don't believe that filling these holes with cash funds is a sustainable path forward. But we did take some measured steps to do things like sweep interest and the like to fill some of the holes. We are facing a structural deficit, and I think we have maybe a difference of opinion about why that exists. And I think Tabor is placing an artificial cap on how we are able to respond to the needs of the state. Things like the cost of healthcare, Medicaid being a third of our budget. Those things increase by a rate of inflation that goes up faster than the price of other goods and services. And so that will present us with challenges going forward.
We will talk about Tabor, don't worry. But let's talk a little bit more about Medicaid, because that's maybe the most pressing issue that you guys are going to face if Republicans in Congress decide to cut Medicaid spending. Obviously, there's been all this talk about the special session. The governor said earlier this evening that backfill just isn't really an option, so it's a matter of making cuts. Are you guys starting to think about where those cuts would be? And do you have some ideas? The governor said, hey, I laid out some ideas in my budget proposal. The JBC said no to them. Are those things that you guys will go ahead and accept if push comes to shove?
Well, I think, we started out this past budget cycle saying everything's on the table. Everything will end up back on the table. And, there are just a handful of choices to make. You can reduce the number of people who are able to get health insurance through Medicaid. You can reduce the amount of services people are able to access, or you can reduce the amount that you reimburse your providers. And none of those feel like good choices. And, I hope that everyone is making their voice heard to our federal representatives. Our lives are in their hands.
Wish I would have been here for the governor. But I would say this, in the governor's budget request in November, he cut rural health care. He cut funding in core services and child welfare, so to neglected and abused kids. And he also cut Medicaid rates to the tune of $57 million. And he cut some programs that are funded in Medicaid by about another $40 million. So that was in the governor's budget request. That was in November. Most of those carried through, a lot of that carried through through January. He did back away on trying to repeal the funding for pediatric behavioral therapy, which was for assessments and resources for children with autism. So he did back away from that. That was a $20 million one, so that was in January. So there are going to be tough questions and tough things that we're going to have to go through. But there have been expansions in Medicaid that we're going to have to look at. I mean, I'm all for making sure that we are providing for those that are very less fortunate than us, the poorest of the poor, if you will. And I think that's where we should start first. And I think then everything will be on the table. But cutting core services to child welfare, to neglected and abused children, yeah, that one's not on the table for me at all. So I think he needs to come up with some better ideas, because there's other programs that probably we should be cutting in other departments. I was at one point served in the Owens administration, and we had years where we were told back in 2001 and 2003 and 4, where we had to cut 9%, 16%, 6% out of our general fund budget in that department, and we were able to do that. And we were able to do that and not necessarily lay people off, but really go through our budget and cut those things that aren't necessary. So I think there are things like that are on the table. I think when, we talk about, I'm sure we're going to talk about Tabor, but when we talk about a lot of other things, to me, this is an overspending issue. We knew in March of 2021 that we were in a structural deficit, and it just got worse. We just kept overspending. We just kept increasing administration, increasing the number of FTE in the executive branch, and in the judicial branch, and in the legislative branch. And by the way, where we get the money for the interim committee is in the legislative branch cash fund that has about $6 million in it that I wanted to sweep, but we didn't get to. So that's where that money comes from. I heard your earlier question. But anyways, I think there are just areas that can be cut, and we are going to have to look at programs. I think departments need to understand that when we say they need to come in with a 5 or 10% cut, they need to come in with a 5 or 10% cut. And it would be helpful if they would look for those things. But in a year where we have a structural deficit, and we started off the year being $1.2 billion in the hole, our general fund budget increased by 3.6% in a year when inflation was 2.4%. So even knowing the structural deficit that we were in and the structural deficit that we still remain in, we still overspent. We overspent above inflation. That is overspending. That's the problem.
Well, I might disagree that it was overspending. I think that the things that we have been doing over the last several years have actually been investing in the services that our constituents elected us to provide, to work on. For example, we added FTE in our Department of Public Health and Environment because this is a department that had been starved for years and didn't have the adequate supports to address the air quality problems that we have in our state, to ensure that we are dealing with air toxics and clean water, that we, throughout the pandemic, were able to invest in our childcare sector to prevent an entire sector from going under. Well, those things require dollars and investments, and yes, we are at a point now where it is difficult to sustain the investments that are necessary to make our state run, but it is not because of overspending. It is because of an artificial cap that is placed on the amount we are able to allocate.
We will come back to that, but
Probably better.
let Megan ask a question because on Medicaid that I think is very interesting.
So going back to the reconciliation package in Congress and Medicaid, one provision in there is going to penalize states that cover undocumented immigrants on their public health programs. Colorado at the beginning of this year started covering undocumented children and pregnant women. If that makes it through Congress and goes into law, what are you two going to say to your colleagues? Is this a program that Colorado should give up on to get more of that federal match? Or is this a hit that Colorado's budget should take to stick with that policy?
Well, it's my understanding, and when I talked with Congressman Gabe Evans, it's my understanding that it's if we are funding through Medicaid or through federal dollars, if we are funding undocumented immigrants. I don't believe we are doing that in this state. The Covering All Coloradoans, it's a Medicaid-like program, but we aren't funding it with federal match dollars. It is all general fund money. So I'm not sure that we will experience that cut from a federal perspective, but I do think it's something that we are going to have to consider as we're looking at the growth of Medicaid and the costs of Medicaid. What can we afford to fund? I mean, you know, when you sit around your own table, dining room table, kitchen table, and you're figuring out your own budget, you don't think year after year, God, I get to spend more money. I get to, max out my credit cards, and somehow that's going to disappear. And that's essentially what we've done in this state. We maxed out the credit cards. We just kept spending, and now we're going to have to pay the piper. We are going to have to figure out how to cut our spending. We have a constitutional mandate to have a balanced budget, and we have to get there. So again, I think we're going to argue all night, because we argued since last November, probably even before that, all the years we've been on the Joint Budget Committee, that this is not a Tabor issue. We are not in a recession. Our revenues didn't go down. Our revenues increased by about $1.3 billion in our general fund operating budget. They didn't decrease. And we overspent. We overspent that. We knew back in March of 2021 we were in a structural deficit, and we didn't try to fix it then. Last year, during the budget process, when we had a question to all of the departments, if you had to cut 10% out of your budget, where would you cut it? They gave us a really flippant response. Well, we'll do that when the JBC tells us we have to, instead of saying, here's where we need to cut. This year, instead of actually cutting, we swept cash funds. We are starting off this next year probably about $500 million still in the hole. And that's not even knowing where we're going to be for sure with Medicaid. But we did $351 million of one-time spending again. We put another $65 million called nursing provider fees in an enterprise, taking it out from underneath the Tabor cap. That won't be there next year. We took multimodal funds to the tune of about $71 million, and we swept those. That's not going to be there next year. We moved around transportation funding. We didn't cut the transportation funding, but we moved around what we have to pay back bonds. We moved it around. That saved us about another $60 million. That's not going to be there next year. That's why I say we're already starting off probably about $500 million in the hole, $500 million in the hole, starting off.
Well, I think, it's not like overspending on your credit card because we have to balance the budget. We are constitutionally required to balance the budget. We're not running on credit here. We do make these tough choices every year. But I think it did come up, the question of what would we do about Cover All Coloradans, a program that was beginning enrollment and started in January. And it was presented as a possible cut for the budget, but I think I didn't support a bill that would have eliminated that program because it reflects my values. I know it reflects the values of the members of the General Assembly who voted on that program, of the speaker who sponsored that program, because it is our value that everyone deserves health care and that they should be able, kids, like covering kids and pregnant women, to ensure that that kids are able to go see the doctor and not just end up in the emergency room, but able to access that health care, that regular health care that we know kids actually need even more than adults. And so it remains to be seen where this lands at the federal level. But there are any number of things that are being proposed in this reconciliation package that I think will cause real hardship to the people who live in Colorado, the people that we in Colorado have chosen to support with our tax dollars.
Do you know what the price of what that line item was? If you guys had eliminated, do you know off the top of your head?
Do I have to keep raising my hand?
No,
I feel like
you
I'm at the
could
Joint
just
Budget Committee, and we have to keep raising our hand
Senator
to say we want to.
Kirkmeyer.
Yeah, like, thank you, Mr. Chair. So it was way over what was scheduled in the fiscal note, but in budget year 25-26, it's budgeted for $32 million. And the proposal that we were trying to move forward at the Joint Budget Committee wasn't to cut the program, like eliminate the program. It was to cap it. Like, could we go back to what was in the fiscal note and try and cap the program so that we start getting some of these things under control? And that was something that we just couldn't move forward on at that point.
Okay. Well, you guys have been wanting to talk about Tabor, so let's do it. So obviously, everyone acknowledges that Colorado has this structural deficit issue. There's disagreements about how we got there, of course, but I think maybe we could agree that Tabor taking more money out of the cap could be a potential solution. And I think you come from a very interesting perspective, Senator Kirkmeyer, having served in the Owens administration, talking about referendum C the last time that the cap was raised. Is that just like a totally non-starter because you see the issue as being a spending one? Or is there any opening for Republicans to have a conversation about increasing the cap? Or is that just, you're giving me a no frickin' way look?
Wow, you've gotten really good at reading my facial expressions.
All these years.
So I would say it's a non-starter for Republicans. We just went through a couple of years ago, and I was one of the co-chairs along with Minority Leader Representative Puglisi. We were the co-chairs on the No on HH campaign. And it was pretty clear in that campaign, trying to say that we wanted to use our surplus to give people property tax relief, even that was a non-starter, even then. So that was a 60-40 vote, right? Even now, I know the polling is showing it's about 70% of the people are like, they like Tabor. Now they understand what Tabor is. They'd like to get their refund checks again, things of that nature. So I just don't see where that's going to go anywhere. You know, I guess there could be a referred measure. There's enough of a majority in the House and in the Senate that they could refer a measure to the ballot, but I guess they could try and refer it. Does the cap require, would that require a constitutional change?
Just the statutory. But
Yes,
so why was
so-
it okay for, you know, why was increasing the cap at Ref C okay under a Republican governor, but not now?
I think that Republican governor went out and did a whole lot of work to build coalitions, Governor Bill Owens, to make that determination, and it came off of a recession. It came off of, remember, 2001, where we had all the fires, and then, you know, we had 9/11, and it came off of that recession, and there was a plan in place about what the cap was going to be used for, and it was, you know, frozen. You know, there was a baseline, and it was frozen, and there was all sorts of things that were worked out in a coalition, but it wasn't at the base of, you know, well, you got yourself into a structural deficit, and we're not in a recession area. So, you know, I think that's going to be part of the difference. And then I just think the public isn't going to accept it at this point. I just don't think they will.
Well, hey, let's you and I go out there and campaign for it together.
Yeah,
We have
right.
child welfare needs that we need to fund, early childhood, childcare needs. We don't pay our teachers enough in this state. I bet there's a lot we could do together.
Well, first of all, the legislature doesn't make a determination on what teacher salaries are. That's done at your school board. And we did fund education this year, and we funded an increase of $150 million. So I think go back to your school boards and have a discussion with them about teacher pay, which is what I would say. But I doubt very seriously that we're going to have a bipartisan campaign to go out and raise the Tabor cap. Not in this year. I mean, I would just like to know how you would go out to the public and say, we've been telling you, they've been telling us that everything's unaffordable in this state, but hey, we need to raise that cap so we can keep more of your tax dollars. I don't know how that would go, but I know I won't be on that side.
Rep. Sirota, it was interesting hearing from the governor who said eliminating the cap for him at least is off the table. I know it's not totally up to him, but it sounded like legislative leadership kind of agreed with the idea that voters have rejected that, and that there seems to be support for this idea of, you know, raising the cap for specific items, whether it's schools or Medicaid or whatever. You're one of the more progressive lawmakers at the Capitol. I kind of wonder what, like, you know, I'm sure your ideal would be just to get rid of Tabor altogether. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but in lieu of that, like, where do you see, you know, the correct path for Democrats here?
I think there are a lot of options on the table for addressing Tabor. I think that there are a variety of things that could garner bipartisan support, maybe not under the dome, but perhaps the voting public, I think, does support public education. And we are woefully underfunding. We're now back to 1989 levels of funding for K-12 education, and we continue to underfund higher education. It's been a priority of the Budget Committee as long as Senator Kirkmeyer and I have been on it, to ensure we are investing in higher ed and keeping the increase in tuition low for Colorado residents. But we have a lot of challenges. Childcare is a critical industry in Colorado, and it's necessary, one, to ensure that kids get a really great start in life, but also to ensure we have the workforce, and people can't go to work if they can't have care for their kids. I think that there are a lot of places where we can make the case to invest in services for Colorado. You know, I also think that a flat tax is not the best way to fund state government, and I think that there is a way to lower taxes for most Coloradans and make sure that the very wealthy are paying their fair share. So I think we have a lot of options on the table, and I look forward to the conversation.
That would take a constitutional amendment, but.
So we're going to wrap up here with a non-JBC question, and I get to ask it, but it's a very Jessie question.
Is it about spicy meatballs?
No, it is not about spicy meatballs.
It's about the thing he loves almost as much as spicy meatballs, vacancy committee reform. You worked on this vacancy committee reform bill. It passed. It was signed into law. There are big changes in there, but one thing it doesn't address is the inherent power of incumbency that somebody gains when they get that vacancy appointment and have some time to represent a district before running. So I'm curious, were there ever discussions about barring somebody who's appointed by a vacancy process from holding that seat or running for that seat in an upcoming election?
And I should say that you both worked on that bill, so just to be clear.
Yes, we both co-primed that bill.
See, there's some bipartisan agreement.
Yes. We had lots of places where we agreed throughout the year. So, in fact, there's about 65 JBC bills that we agreed on. So it sounds like you've been talking to Representative Marshall. And I would say that from my perspective, I think it's unconstitutional to bar someone from their right to run for election. So when he asked me if I would be on that bill, I said no, for that reason. I don't think that's right, that people don't. I think anybody should get to run for office, and I think everyone should have equal access to it. And just because you fill a vacancy doesn't mean that you shouldn't get to run for that office then later. I just don't think that makes sense. I think given how, and I'm not going to say complicated, but given the immense amount of information and subject areas that you have to learn about when you're a state legislator or in any elected office, quite frankly. But to say, yeah, hey, we're going to let you fill a vacancy for a year, but then after that, you're out of here. Kind of a waste of time, really. I mean, we're working on getting people, engaged, getting them informed so that they can make great informed decisions. And then we'd say, but, you're only going to be here a year, so then you're gone anyways. So before they're even have the opportunity to run for office, they're already a lame duck. And I just don't think that's wise either. So I wouldn't support that. I appreciated our bill. We worked on this bill together, and I think it was very clear the Republicans in the room knew what their caucuses would agree to, and the Democrats in the room knew what their caucuses would agree to. And I think we got to a really good compromise that in the end, a vacancy gets filled, so there isn't any time lapse that Coloradoans are represented. But then it has to go to an election, and basically within a year, they would have to go through an election type process. But it's a special election process that allows, if it's a Democrat that's being replaced, then Democrats and unaffiliates would be able to vote. If it's a Republican, it would be Republicans and unaffiliates. And I think that's a good first compromise and a great place to start, and let's see how that goes. I think it's important that people who vote and people who want to vote should get to be able to select their representative or their state senator. And that's what this bill was about, because just in the last year, just since last November, we have filled 4 vacancies in the state Senate and at least 1 in the House. And they've been filled with, in the state Senate, we have 175,000 people that live in each Senate district. And when only maybe 50, maybe 100 people or less in the House, it was 10 people who voted and filled a vacancy. Is that representative government? Doesn't really sound like it to me. So that's why I think going through this reform was so important.
Yeah, I think we found a lot of agreement. I too felt that idea of barring someone from running for election was a bad idea. And the way it was presented to me was we should just put a lobbyist or an aide in there. And I said, why would that be better? I think we actually have gotten some great representatives and senators from the vacancy process. And this new bill will ensure that nobody is going to serve more than 1 regular session before having to go through an election and present themselves to the voters. And so I think that will be healthy, but I don't think that, to Senator Kirkmeyer's point, it's a hard job and there is a learning curve. And so I think just saying, well, we don't, even though you have gained that experience and that's something that voters may want to consider, we're just gonna shove you aside. I don't think that serves voters or public policy best. And I also think that we saw in the 24 election, there were folks who came in on a vacancy and they didn't win their primary. So
That's true. Well, we are at time. I'm going to ask one quick question, a little spicy meatball. Why not? In our final seconds here, Jeff Bridges, JBC chair, is running for state treasurer. You two have both been mentioned for different statewide offices. Do you guys want to announce for anything here?
No. But I would like to say this, and thank you for that question, and you knew we weren't going to answer that. But I would say on the Joint Budget Committee, it is my favorite place to be. And I do love my job, and it's because of the people that I get to work with. We come from different backgrounds. You know, I come from a rural background, grew up on a dairy farm in North Jefferson County.
I grew up in cornfields and soybean fields.
But I live in Weld County still. Representative Sirota is in Denver. We come from some different backgrounds and some different ideas. But I think that we all work really hard to understand each other's position and then follow through on that to come up with a compromise that serves the people of the state of Colorado best. And I appreciate the fact that even though we have disagreements on certain things, we can agree on priorities. And then we start working our way down from there. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of hours. You get to know everybody pretty well on the Joint Budget Committee, but I think we have a great committee that really works in the best interests of the state of Colorado and the people who live in this state. And even last year, even though regardless, maybe we have some differences, I know maybe Representative Sirota was a little surprised when Representative Sirota and Majority Leader Rodriguez asked me about funding additional money for the undocumented immigrants that were in our school system. And we got that bill through. And we got it through at a $24 million level, unlike where other people want it to start. And that was us pushing that through. And I think that's the kind of camaraderie and the bipartisanship that we can demonstrate on the Joint Budget Committee. And hopefully it bleeds over into our caucuses on the Senate floor and the House floor. I just added on my own ad.
Yeah. No, I had heard in the past that maybe you were interested in running for U.S. Senate, but I don't know. Okay.
Is that true?
Yeah, is it? Yeah. You could be a reporter, Senator. There you go. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. I want to thank the sponsors of tonight's event, Aponte and Busan Public Affairs Consultants and Calder Capital Watch. Thank you so much, Megan, for joining me up here. I really appreciate it. It's great because I'm going to need my voice for tomorrow. For those folks who are interested in joining, Sunfest begins tomorrow here at 9 a.m. where I'll be interviewing Phil Weiser about his pushback against the Trump administration and his 2026 gubernatorial bid. 10 a.m. we're going to have a polling panel, and then at 2:30 I'll be interviewing Mark McKinnon, co-creator of The Circus on Showtime. He's a longtime political mind. He wears great hats. I am super excited to talk to him. He is a super fun guy. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you to the University of Denver for being such great partners with the Colorado Sun. We can't say enough good things about how much you guys have been a help to us. Get home safe and go Nuggets.
Go.